Mike Tyson at age 12. Teacher said, "You will never be a fighter." What happened next left the cramped, dimly lit classroom of PS 147 in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Smelled of chalk dust, old textbooks, and the faint, pervasive odor of mildew that seemed to seep from the very walls. The windows, grimy and cracked, offered little natural light, casting long shadows across the rows of battered desks. It was 1978, and the school, like the neighborhood it served, was a place of struggle, of survival, of dreams deferred. At the back of the room, hunched over a desk that was too small for his already powerful frame, sat a 12-year-old boy named Mike Tyson. His clothes were worn and ill-fitting, his face marked by the hardships of a childhood spent in poverty and violence. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something else, a quiet intensity, a simmering defiance that belied his young age. The teacher, Mr. Bartholomew, was a tired, disillusioned man in his late 50s, his enthusiasm for education long since extinguished by years of battling indifference and systemic neglect. He stood at the front of the class, droning on about fractions, his voice a monotonous hum that barely registered with the restless students. Most were staring out the windows, doodling in their notebooks or whispering to each other, their attention anywhere but on the lesson. Mike, however, was different. He wasn't daydreaming or causing trouble. He was simply sitting there, his gaze fixed on his desk, his powerful hands clenched into fists, a silent storm brewing within him. Mr. Bartholomew, noticing Mike's unusual stillness, paused mid-sentence. He had heard the rumors about this boy, the whispers in the teacher's lounge about his troubled home life, his frequent absences, his explosive temper. He saw Mike not as a student with potential, but as a problem, a statistic, another casualty of the broken system. "Mr. Tyson," Mr. Bartholomew called out, his voice sharp and condescending. "Are you paying attention, or are you just daydreaming about getting into another fight?" A few students snickered, their eyes darting towards Mike, then back to the teacher. Mike slowly lifted his head, his gaze meeting Mr. Bartholomew's. He didn't speak, didn't react overtly, but his eyes held a quiet intensity that made the teacher shift uncomfortably. "I asked you a question, Mr. Tyson." "Mr. Bartholomew pressed, his voice rising slightly. "What are you planning to do with your life? Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like much." He then leaned against his desk, crossing his arms, a smug look on his face. "Let me guess, you're going to end up in jail, just like half the kids from this neighborhood. Or maybe you'll be dead before you're 20. That seems to be the trajectory for boys like you." The words, delivered with such casual cruelty, hung heavy in the stale air. The other students fell silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the raw, brutal honesty of the teacher's assessment. Mike remained silent, his jaw clenched, his fists tightening on the desk. He had heard these words before, variations of them, from social workers, from police officers, from neighbors. He was used to being dismissed, to being written off as another lost cause. But hearing it from a teacher, someone who was supposed to inspire, to guide, cut deeper than usual. Mr. Bartholomew, emboldened by Mike's silence, continued his verbal assault. "I've seen your file, Mr. Tyson. Truancy, fighting, theft. You're a troublemaker, a delinquent. And frankly, I don't see any future for you beyond the streets." He then picked up a piece of chalk, tapping it against the blackboard. "Some kids are born winners, Mr. Tyson. They have the intelligence, the discipline, the family support to succeed. And then there are kids like you who are born losers. And no amount of wishful thinking is going to change that." He then turned back to Mike, his gaze cold and dismissive. "So tell me, Mr. Tyson, what are your grand ambitions? What do you dream of becoming? A doctor? A lawyer? A businessman?" He let out a short, derisive laugh. "I highly doubt it." Mike, his voice barely a whisper, finally spoke. "I want to be a fighter," he said. his words slow and deliberate, still carrying the slight lisp that would become his trademark. "Mr." Bartholomew scoffed, a loud, dismissive sound that echoed through the silent classroom. "A fighter? You?" He laughed again, this time louder, more mocking. "Mr. Tyson, you're 12 years old, you're overweight, you have a speech impediment, and you can barely read. You will never be a fighter. That's a fantasy, a pipe dream. Fighters are disciplined, dedicated, intelligent. You possess none of those qualities." He then turned to the rest of the class, as if seeking their validation. Can you imagine this boy in a boxing ring? He'd be knocked out in the first round. A few students, emboldened by the teacher's cruelty, snickered nervously, but most remained silent, their faces a mixture of discomfort and pity. They knew Mike, they knew his temper, and they sensed that Mr. Bartholomew had crossed a dangerous line. Mike, his face now flushed with a mixture of shame and rage, slowly rose from his desk. His powerful frame, even at 12, was imposing, and the sudden movement silenced the remaining snickers. And if you're wondering what kind of fire burns inside a 12-year-old boy who's been told he'll never amount to anything, or what happens when crushing words meet an unbreakable will, then you absolutely need to hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss the truth that's about to unfold, a truth that will prove every single doubter wrong. This story is far from over, and the real consequences are about to be delivered. Mr. Bartholomew, seeing Mike rise, instinctively took a step back, his earlier bravado faltering. "Sit down, Mr. Tyson," he said, his voice now less confident, tinged with a hint of fear. But Mike didn't sit down. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed on the teacher, his fists still clenched. He didn't speak, didn't threaten, but the sheer raw emotion radiating from him was palpable. The air in the classroom grew thick, with tension, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of the city outside. Then, without another word, Mike turned and walked towards the door. He didn't storm out, didn't slam anything. He simply left, his footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. That day, something fundamental shifted within Mike Tyson. The teacher's words, meant to crush him, instead ignited a fire, a burning determination to prove everyone wrong. He found his way to the Tryon School for Boys, a juvenile detention center, where he met Cus D'Amato, a legendary boxing trainer who saw not a lost cause, but raw, untapped potential. Cus took Mike under his wing, not just as a trainer, but as a father figure, instilling in him discipline, technique, and an unwavering belief in himself. Under Cus's guidance, Mike transformed from a troubled, overweight kid into a focused, disciplined fighter. Years passed. Mike Tyson dedicated himself to boxing with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. He trained relentlessly, honing his skills, building his strength, channeling his rage and pain into devastating power. He rose through the amateur ranks with astonishing speed, his explosive style and knockout power earning him a fearsome reputation. By the age of 20, he had become the youngest heavyweight champion in history, a title he claimed with a brutal first-round knockout. The world watched in awe as this young man, who had been written off as a nobody, dominated the sport with an intensity and ferocity that had never been seen before. Mike Tyson became Iron Mike, a force of nature, a symbol of raw power and unwavering determination. He defended his title multiple times, each fight a testament to his skill, his discipline, and his refusal to be defined by his past. He became one of the most recognizable and feared athletes on the planet, his name synonymous with boxing greatness. He earned millions, achieved global fame, and proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the 12-year-old boy who had been told he would never be a fighter had become the baddest man on the planet. Years later, long after his retirement, Mike Tyson returned to Brooklyn, not as a lost cause, but as a legend. He visited schools, spoke to troubled youth, sharing his story, offering hope to those who felt hopeless. And one day, he found himself standing outside PS 147, the very school where Mr. Bartholomew had crushed his dreams. The building was still there, though more dilapidated, a monument to a forgotten era. Mike walked through the familiar hallways, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. He found the classroom, now empty and dusty, the desks still arranged in the same rows. He stood at the back of the room, where he had once sat as a 12-year-old boy, and he remembered Mr. Miller, Bartholomew's words. "You will never be a fighter." He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. The teacher had been wrong. Spectacularly, undeniably wrong. Mike then pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet, a picture of himself holding the heavyweight championship belt, his face etched with triumph. He placed the photograph on the desk where he had once sat, a silent testament to the power of perseverance, the strength of belief, and the undeniable truth that dreams, no matter how impossible they seem, can be achieved with unwavering dedication. He then turned and walked out of the classroom, leaving the photograph behind, a message for any future student who might sit in that same desk, feeling hopeless, feeling lost. The message was clear. Never let anyone tell you what you can't achieve. Never let anyone define your limits. And never, ever give up on your dreams, no matter how many people tell you they're impossible. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are born not from privilege or encouragement, but from the burning desire to prove the doubters wrong. Respect isn't given, it's earned through relentless dedication and an unbreakable will. Silent doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes the quietest person carries the greatest power, and the most profound lessons are taught not with words, but with the undeniable truth of what you become when you refuse to accept defeat.